Hello, my friends. Pull up a chair. Grab some coffee if you like. Today I'm going to tell you a story that will make you think twice before you ever threaten someone's family. This is the story of a man named Frank Coletti, a retired U.S. Marshal, 30 years on the job, and a man who learned that the scariest weapon isn't a gun, it's a calm mind and a patient plan. But before we dive in, let me explain something. A U.S. Marshal is not a regular cop. These are the people who hunt the most dangerous fugitives in America. They track murderers. They protect witnesses. They go into the darkest places and bring out the worst criminals alive if possible. Frank did that for 3 decades. He'd kick down doors in the middle of the night. He'd stare down cartel hitmen. He'd sat across from serial killers and made them confess with nothing but his voice and his presence. He'd seen the worst of humanity. And somehow, he'd come out the other side with his soul intact. And then he retired. Frank was 58 years old when he hung up his badge and his service weapon. His knees were shot from years of running after felons through back alleys and swamps. His back ached every morning like a dull knife twisting between his shoulders. His hands shook just enough that he sometimes missed his coffee cup, a tremor from too many adrenaline rushes and too little sleep over too many years. But his eyes, those were still sharp as an eagle's. Nothing got past those eyes. They'd seen too much to be fooled by anything. He moved to a small town in Arizona. Dust, heat, old people. A little diner that made the best apple pie in the county. Nothing ever happened there, and that was exactly what Frank wanted. He bought a small house with a porch and a cactus in the front yard. He spent his mornings reading newspapers and his afternoons napping in a rocking chair. He'd wave to the neighbors. He'd feed the stray cats. He'd become just another old man fatting into the desert sun. His daughter, Elena, was 32, a high school English teacher, divorced, raising her 9-year-old son, Leo, on her own. She was tougher than she looked. She'd been through a nasty divorce, a custody battle, and a move across the state, all while keeping a smile on her face for her students and her son. But beneath that strength, she was fragile. She worried constantly. About money, about Leo's future, about her father getting older and lonelier. Every Sunday, Frank drove to Elena's house for spaghetti. It was their ritual. He'd arrive at 4 p.m. with a bottle of cheap red wine and a bag of groceries. He'd help Leo with his homework, especially math, which Leo hated. He'd fix the leaky faucet in the kitchen or the squeaky hinge on the back door. He'd sit on the porch with Elena while Leo played in the yard, and they'd watch the sunset together, talking about nothing and everything. Life was quiet, deliberately quiet. That was the plan. But plans have a way of falling apart, don't they? It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Elena was leaving the school parking lot after a long day of grading essays. She was tired, her head ached. She just wanted to get home, take off her shoes, and collapse on the couch. A black pickup truck cut her off, swerved right in front of her so close she could have reached out and touched the rust on its bumper. She honked. Once. Lightly. Just to say, "Hey, I'm here." The driver slammed his brakes, jumped out, stormed to her window. His name was Dante Reyes, mid-20s, gold chains, cheap tattoos crawling up his neck, a face full of fake bravado and real anger. He ran a small meth operation out of a trailer park on the edge of town, but in this tiny place that made him the king. Everybody knew who he was. Everybody was afraid of him. He screamed at her, called her every name you can imagine. His face was purple with rage. Spit flew from his mouth. His hands pounded on her roof. Then he pointed his finger right in her face and said, "I know where you live. I know you got a kid. Next time I'll put your kid in the hospital. You hear me? Hospital." Elena was frozen. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles went white. She didn't fight back. She didn't even roll up her window. She just nodded, drove away, and cried all the way home. She locked every door. She checked on Leo 3 times before midnight. She didn't call Frank. She was too scared, too ashamed. She thought if she told her father, he'd do something stupid, something that would get him hurt or worse. She thought she could handle it herself. She thought if she just stayed quiet, it would go away. But kids don't keep secrets well, do they? Little Leo told his grandpa the very next day. While they were building a birdhouse together in Frank's backyard, Leo's small hand struggling with the hammer, he whispered, "Grandpa, a bad man yelled at Mommy. He said he'd hurt me." Frank didn't explode. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even stop hammering. He just patted Leo on the head and said, "Don't worry, Mijo. Grandpa will handle it." Then he gave Leo an extra scoop of ice cream and drove him home. That night Frank didn't sleep. He sat in his rocking chair on the porch staring at the stars, thinking, not about revenge, not about violence, about strategy, about information, about how to take apart a man without ever throwing a punch. He'd learned that in 30 years of chasing fugitives, the loudest man in the room is rarely the most dangerous. The most dangerous man is the one who stays quiet, watches, and waits. Now this is where the story gets good, because Frank didn't rush over to Dante's trailer with a gun. That's what amateurs do. That's what hotheads do. Frank did what he'd done for 30 years. He gathered intelligence. He called an old partner, still a deputy marshal in Phoenix, and asked for a background check on Dante Reyes. No warrants, no felony record, just a juvenile assault that was sealed. But Frank knew that sealed records could be opened with the right phone call and the right favor. He also asked for anything else, associates, known addresses, vehicle information. But Frank didn't stop there. He pulled property records, vehicle registrations, utility bills. He found Dante's mother's house, a small yellow bungalow on the south side. His girlfriend's apartment, a rundown complex near the highway. The trailer where he cooked his drugs, hidden behind a junkyard, surrounded by rusted cars and broken fences. Frank mapped it all out on a piece of paper, like a general planning a campaign. He knew where Dante slept, where he ate, where he worked, and where he went to hide. Then Frank did something that would terrify any criminal. He watched. For 3 days, Frank sat in his old Ford sedan, drinking coffee from a thermos, binoculars in hand. He parked at different spots each day, never the same place twice. He wore different hats and different shirts. He looked like any other old retiree with nothing to do. He noted Dante's routine. Woke up at noon, went to the gym for exactly 1 hour, picked up his girlfriend at 3 p.m., visited his mother at 5 p.m. for dinner, then drove to the trailer from 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. to cook his poison. Frank also noticed something else, something important. Dante was paranoid. He checked his mirrors constantly every few seconds. He changed his route to the trailer every night. He carried a gun in his waistband, illegally, of course. He had a pit bull that barked at every shadow and every passing car. He never stayed in one place for too long. He never let anyone get too close. Frank smiled at this, because he realized something crucial. Dante wasn't a kingpin. He wasn't a master criminal. He wasn't some untouchable drug lord. He was a scared kid with a temper and a gun. A kid who'd grown up in poverty, who'd never had a father, who'd learned that the only way to survive was to make everyone afraid of him. And scared kids make mistakes, big ones. Frank didn't confront Dante directly. That would be too obvious. That would put Dante on guard. Instead, he went to Dante's mother's house on a Thursday morning. He wore a clean polo shirt. He shaved. He carried a box of pastries from the local bakery, the good ones with the cream filling and the powdered sugar. He knocked on the door and introduced himself as Mr. Coletti from the neighborhood watch. He complimented her roses. They really were beautiful, red and full. He talked about the weather, about the heat wave coming next week, about the price of gas. Then he casually mentioned, "You know, I used to work for the federal government. If your son ever needs legal advice, I'd be happy to help." The mother beamed. She had no idea who she was talking to. She offered him lemonade. She showed him photos of Dante as a little boy. She was proud of her son. She didn't know what he'd become. But Dante was sleeping in the back room, and he heard every word through the thin walls. He heard his mother laughing. He heard Frank's calm, steady voice. He heard the mention of federal government. And something cold ran down his spine. That afternoon, Frank sat in his car outside the gym. When Dante came out, Frank rolled down his window and called out, "Dante, good workout." Dante froze. His face went pale, the color draining from his cheeks like water from a sink. "Who the hell are you?" "Just a concerned citizen," Frank said, smiling that calm, patient smile. I hear you're a businessman, I respect that, but I also hear you've been talking to my daughter, Elena, the teacher." Dante's face turned red, the blood rushing back with a vengeance. "That bitch cut me off." "No," Frank said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried across the entire parking lot. "She honked. You threatened to put her kid in the hospital. That kid is my grandson." Dante stepped forward, his hand twitching toward his waistband where the gun was hidden. "You old fool, I'll put you in the ground." Frank didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't even lean back. He held up his phone. "I recorded that," he said calmly, almost conversationally. "Every word, threats, intent, and now you're reaching for a weapon. You're on camera from 3 different angles: my car, the gym's security, and the traffic light across the street. I've got you from every side." Don stopped. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His hand dropped. Frank continued, his voice still low and steady, the voice of a man who talked killers into surrendering. "I'm not a cop anymore. I don't have a badge, but I have 30 years of experience putting men like you in federal prisons. Not for drugs, not for assault, for stupidity. Because you're about to do something stupid, and I have enough evidence to get you 10 years for threatening a federal officer's family member. That's a felony. That's federal time." He paused. "Let that sink in. You'll be 35 when you get out. Your mother will be dead. Your girlfriend will have moved on. Your pit bull will be someone else's dog. And you'll have nothing but a prison record and a broken life." Dante's hand dropped completely. He spat on the ground. "You're bluffing." Frank opened his car door slowly. His knees cracked. He stood up, shorter than Dante, older, visibly weaker. His shoulders were slumped, his hands shook slightly, but his eyes were cold steel. He walked right up to Dante, face to face, so close they could smell each other's breath. "I've chased murderers through swamps," Frank whispered. "I've arrested cartel lieutenants who had 100 armed men protecting them. I've sat across from serial killers and made them cry. You're a flea, you're nothing. The only reason you're still standing is because my daughter asked me not to ruin your life." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a barely audible murmur. "She's merciful, I am not. So here's your one warning. You leave my daughter alone. You leave my grandson alone. Or I will destroy you, not with my hands, not with a gun, but with paperwork, witnesses, and every legal weapon I've spent 30 years learning how to use. Do you understand me?" Dante didn't answer. He just stood there frozen, his face a mask of rage and fear. Frank got back in his car and drove away. He didn't look back. Dante was humiliated, and humiliated men do stupid things. He spent the rest of the day packing in his trailer, drinking cheap whiskey, muttering to himself. He called his girlfriend and screamed at her. He kicked his dog. He threw a chair against the wall. The anger boiled inside him like lava. He couldn't let this old man get away with it. He couldn't let anyone think he was weak. That night at 2 a.m. he drove to Elena's house. He parked a block away and walked the rest, trying to be quiet, trying to be clever. He threw a rock through her living room window. The glass shattered with a sound like a gunshot. He spray-painted dye on her garage door in bright red letters. He laughed to himself. He thought he was sending a message. He thought he was winning. He didn't know Frank was parked 2 blocks away with a night vision camera and a federal-grade audio recorder, the kind that could pick up a whisper from 100 yards. Frank had anticipated exactly this. He knew that prideful, humiliated men always escalate. He'd seen it 100 times. He'd even called the local police chief earlier that day, a former Marine who owed Frank a favor from a case 20 years ago. Frank had said, "If you get a call about a disturbance at my daughter's address, give me 10 minutes before you respond." The chief, confused but trusting, agreed. Frank didn't explain. He didn't need to. Frank didn't call 911. He called Dante's mother at 2:15 a.m. "Mrs. Reyes," he said calmly, "your son is currently vandalizing my daughter's property. I have video and audio. I'm giving you 1 hour to convince him to turn himself in to the police, or I release this footage to the local news, the DEA, and every parole officer in the county. He'll be a target in prison within a week. He'll be dead within a year." The mother sobbed. "Please, he's just a boy, he's got problems." "He's 26, Frank said. And he threatened a child. That's not a boy. That's a monster. But I'll give you this chance because my grandson asked me to be kind. Because he doesn't know what hate looks like yet. I want to keep it that way. Dante's mother called him. She begged him. She cried. She told him to turn himself in. He screamed at her, called her a traitor, and hung up. Then he sat in his truck, shaking, smoking cigarette after cigarette, trying to decide what to do. He didn't go to the police. He did something worse. He drove to Frank's house. Dante showed up at Frank's house at 6 a.m., red-eyed, shaking, reeking of meth and whiskey and desperation. He kicked the door open, the cheap lock splintered like toothpicks. Frank was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee, wearing his old Marshall's windbreaker. On the table were three things: a laminated copy of his retirement certificate, a photo of Alina and Leo, and a small voice recorder. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look scared. He looked like a man who'd been expecting company. "Sit down, Dante," Frank said, "before you do something that ends with you in a box." Dante pulled his gun, the same cheap, unregistered pistol he always carried. "I'll kill you, old man. I'll kill you and your whole family." Frank didn't move, didn't raise his hands, just looked at Dante with those cold, patient eyes. "That gun is unregistered," Frank said, his voice as calm as if he were discussing the weather. "You bought it off a guy named Tito at the swap meet. I have that on recording too. I have Tito's name, his address, and his phone number. You're holding that gun in front of 3 witnesses, my neighbor's Ring doorbell, my own security system, and the traffic camera on the corner. You pull that trigger, you're dead before you holster it. Not by me. By the 6 deputies I have waiting outside." Dante whipped his head toward the window. No deputies, no cars, no flashing lights. He laughed, a manic, desperate laugh. "You're lying, there's nobody out there." Frank pressed a button on the recorder. A voice crackled, Dante's own voice from the gym. "I'll put your kid in the hospital." Another clip, "You old fool, I'll put you in the ground." A third clip, the sound of the rock smashing Alina's window. A fourth, Dante's mother sobbing on the phone. A fifth, Dante screaming at his girlfriend. Frank had everything, every threat, every insult, every piece of evidence. Frank stood up slowly. His knees cracked, his back straightened, but his voice was iron. "That's 3 felony threats, 1 act of vandalism, and now armed home invasion. You're looking at 15 to life. You'll die in prison. You'll never see your mother again. You'll never see the sun again." He took a step forward. "But here's the deal. You walk out that door right now. You go to the police station. You confess to everything. You'll do 5 years. You'll get out. You'll be 31. You can still rebuild your life. You can still make your mother proud. You can still be somebody." He tapped the recorder. "If you refuse, I send this to the U.S. Attorney's Office. They'll add federal charges. You'll never see daylight again. I'll make sure of it." Dante's gun hand trembled. His eyes darted left, right, left again. He was cornered. He knew it. Frank took another step closer, not aggressive, not threatening, just present, just real. "I'm not going to hurt you, son. I don't need to. I already won. The question is, do you want to live long enough to try again? Or do you want to die in a prison yard over a traffic honk, over a moment of road rage, over your own stupid pride?" Dante dropped the gun. It clattered on the tile floor like a cheap toy. He collapsed into a chair, put his head in his hands, and cried ugly, snotty, broken sobs. He cried like a little boy who'd never learned how to be anything but angry. He cried for his father who abandoned him. He cried for the years he'd wasted. He cried because for the first time in his life, someone had looked at him with neither fear nor hatred, but with something worse, pity. Frank called the police. They arrived in 4 minutes. Dante was taken into custody without resistance. He confessed to everything just as Frank had predicted. The prosecutor offered a plea deal, 5 years, reduced for cooperation. Dante signed it without a fight. Frank didn't attend the sentencing. He didn't need to. He was at Alina's house teaching Leo how to throw a curveball in the backyard. Leo's little arm was getting stronger. He could already throw a decent pitch. Frank showed him how to grip the seams, how to snap his wrist. Alina watched from the porch, her arms crossed, a small smile on her face. She didn't ask her father what happened. She didn't want to know. She just knew that the nightmare was over. That was enough. 6 months later, Frank received a letter from Dante, written from prison. It wasn't angry, it was grateful. Dante wrote, "Mr. Coletti, you could have destroyed me. You could have killed me or had me killed, but you gave me a chance. I'm getting my GED in here. I'm going to counseling every week. I'm learning to read better. I never got past the 8th grade. I think about what I said to your daughter every day. I think about what I wrote on her garage door. I was a coward. A pathetic, scared little coward. You were the first man who ever scared me enough to make me stop. The first man who ever made me think. Thank you. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know you changed my life." Frank folded the letter, put it in his safe next to his badge and his service weapon, and he smiled. Not a smug smile, not a triumphant smile. A quiet, peaceful smile. He'd done what he'd always done. He'd brought justice without bloodshed. He'd broken a man down and given him a chance to rebuild. That was the Marshal's way. That was the only way that mattered. You see, my friends, revenge isn't always about blood. It's not about violence. It's not about making someone suffer. True revenge, the kind that lasts, the kind that heals, is about complete, total, absolute dismantling of a person's ego, stripping away every lie they tell themselves, and then offering them a choice, ruin or redemption. Frank gave Dante that choice, and Dante chose redemption. Later that week, Leo asked his grandpa, "Did you really catch bad guys?" Frank rubbed his aching knee, looked at his grandson's missing tooth, smile, and said, "No, Mijo, I caught stupid guys. There's a difference." Leo laughed. Frank laughed too, and in that moment Frank knew the real victory wasn't putting Dante in prison. It wasn't the letter. It wasn't the confession. The real victory was sitting on this porch, watching the sunset with his family safe beside him. Leo running through the sprinklers, Alina bringing out lemonade, the smell of dinner cooking in the kitchen. That was the reward. That was the last badge he ever needed. And that, my friends, is the story of Frank Coletti, a man who proved that the most powerful weapon isn't a gun, it's patience, intelligence, and the willingness to let the other person dig their own grave. It's the ability to stay calm when everyone else is panicking. It's the discipline to gather information before acting. It's the wisdom to know that violence is the last resort, not the first. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this: never threaten a child. And never ever underestimate a retired marshal. Because they don't carry badges anymore, but they still carry the weight of 30 years of justice, 30 years of training, 30 years of knowing exactly how to break a man without ever raising a fist. And justice, my friends, has a long memory. It waits. It watches. And when the time is right, it acts. The end.